Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Communicative Leader. I'm your host, Dr. Leah O. We often talk about leadership as a set of these external tactics, strategy, metrics, directives. But today's guest argues that the greatest barrier to effective leadership isn't out there in the market, it's sitting right here between our ears. Joining us is Dr. Ron Camacho, the Chief of Police for North Charleston, South Carolina, and a graduate of the FBI National Academy. With over 30 years of experience in high-stakes law enforcement, from commanding patrol operations in Pennsylvania to advising police forces in Afghanistan and Mexico, Ron has seen firsthand how trust is built or broken in the heat of the moment. He is a nationally recognized expert on emotional intelligence and the author of the upcoming book, Bring Ego to the Forefront. Today, we're diving into the role of ego in communication, how to maintain a grounded leadership presence under extreme stress, and why self-awareness is the ultimate tactical advantage for any leader trying to build a resilient, high-trust team. Let's dive in and have some fun. Hello, and welcome to The Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On The Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Ron, thank you for joining us today on The Communicative Leader. You know that you have spent over 30 years in high-stakes law enforcement from Pennsylvania to Afghanistan. And I'm wondering, what was a specific moment or kind of that ego check in your career that made you realize that self-awareness was a tactical necessity, not just a soft skill?
Yeah, so I really didn't have one of those self-check type situations. Therapy is where I got my self-check. Before that, when my ego was running wild, it wasn't catching that, that it was running wild. So when I entered therapy is when I first got confronted that my ego was a huge issue, my anger was a huge issue, and that's when I really started working on myself and these problems. And I needed to work on the trauma to heal that so I can start working on myself and the ego. And that started the journey way back in 2013. That started the journey on me, working on this ego issue, So, and then from there, I guess when I first became a chief and I started implementing these things and just being a lot more, entering situations with a lot more compassion and openness and empathetic, and then kind of being around a lot of my peers and watching them kind of do it the old school way and seeing that, wow, that's very different. And that's me, a couple of years ago before I had this revelation, before I went into therapy, and just seeing the contrast. And then seeing some of my successes, seeing how I was able to connect with my people and get them to go along this journey with me, really kind of let me know, hey, it is important to make sure that we're self-aware. I always say there's nobody that's more critical on themselves than me. And I'm always looking at that mirror every day and making sure that who I see in that mirror is who's reflected to the people that I deal with every day, my officers, the community, and my family.
Yeah. And good for you, Ron. That's the hardest work, right? That self-work, that self-awareness. Like whatever other job we take on professionally, it is much easier in so many ways compared to that continuous self-work.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
So I am so excited because you have an upcoming book, Bring Ego to the Forefront. And in this book, you talk about the ego tax. And for those who haven't heard the term, I'm wondering if you could tell us, how do leaders unknowingly pay this tax in their daily communication?
Yeah. When you're communicating with your team and you're making it about you and not about them, it chips away at your credibility and you're chipping away at that trust. And over time, that chips away. And then your leadership ability just diminishes and you don't become an effective leader, right? Because it's about you and it's not about them. It's not about the organization. It's not about the team. So I have a saying that the day that I put people over myself, my life changed exponentially. And, just the world opened up and, I've done so many incredible things in my life that I don't have any more boxes to check, right? And
Mhm.
now it's about making the people around me better. And it's about them and their successes. And when they
Mhm.
succeed, I succeed. And it makes me very, very happy when others get better. So
Yeah.
with that, it's always moving forward and thinking about them and pushing the message out about them and how we can make them better and just putting yourself in the background and not thinking about yourself. So as
Mhm.
the leaders, we got to take our ego, we got to put that in the back and always
Mhm.
think about the team, think about the organization, and think about our
Yep.
people before we think about ourselves. And sometimes that's hard, right? Younger leaders,
Mhm.
you know, they're kind of,
Mhm.
wanting those accolades, right? I was there at one
Mhm.
point in time. We want those pats on the back.
Mhm.
That's why it's so important to get on top of the ego so early in our
Mhm.
career.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
so again, if we can start working on this early and start thinking
Mhm.
about others early,
Mhm.
we will see that connection earlier and see those successes earlier in our careers and our lives.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned in this too, and I think on the surface it feels counterintuitive because you think when you're putting others before you, you will naturally get less, right? Whether it's accolades or successes. But when we're putting others first, then we tend to see our own successes, amass more quickly than when we were going that other route, which is again counterintuitive on the surface, but rewarding in so many ways.
Yeah, my wife, who I couldn't have done a lot of this without her,
Mhm.
she's incredible. She says all the time, like, when these blessings come, these opportunities
Mhm.
that have come my way, she's like,
Mhm.
this has happened and that has happened, and I've had this opportunity, that opportunity, and she's like, where did all this stuff comes from? It comes out of nowhere, but really it
Yep.
comes because I'm putting out this good energy into the
Yep.
universe and just continually, offering myself to help people,
Mhm.
get people to the next level and
Yep.
just with that positive attitude and just really putting others before myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Ron.
Yes.
So let's connect an overactive ego with listening or an inability to listen. So I'm wondering, in your experience, if someone is kind of ego first, how does that distort their ability to truly listen? And then, especially during a crisis, right, with the work that you do, what have you seen happen there?
Yeah, so the ego is telling you, I want to win, I have all the answers, I'm right. And if you're going into a crisis with that mentality, you're not going to be able to listen to the many different opinions that you'll probably need in order to solve a crisis, right? When you go into a crisis, whatever that crisis may be, many minds are better than one mind. And I found that being hard, right? To get some people. I was a SWAT guy for 14 years, and
Mhm.
we're kind of, that alpha male type mentality, our way
Mhm.
or the highway type situation. And when I became the commander of the team, which is the SWAT and the negotiators, I went to negotiations school, right? I had to become a negotiator in order to understand the negotiation part of the school. That gave me a totally different perspective and it gave me a totally different way of how to manage, barricaded gunmen or, different SWAT type situations. And it really told me to slow things down, right? And listen to the negotiators more, where before I was just being dismissive of them. So, and that was my SWAT ego, right? Oh,
Yeah.
they're just limiting. They don't. They just want what they want. They're not listening to us. So
Mhm.
the ego is telling you, hey, I'm right.
Mhm.
My way or the highway. I have all the answers, and that could be dangerous when we're dealing with
Yeah.
crisis. That can be dangerous in those type situations where you want many minds.
Mhm.
You want those different opinions coming at you. The beauty about still being in this profession is that
Mhm.
daily I get put in these situations where I'm dealing with this. So just yesterday, I was dealing with some community members, church members, on a
Mhm.
sensitive subject having to do with juveniles.
Mhm.
And we were confronted with a problem, an issue that we've been dealing with a lot, and it's been confounding. It's a very sensitive subject, and we've been trying to figure out a problem for a while. Excuse me, an answer to this issue for a while.
Mhm.
And we've tried different methods to come up with the solution, but we haven't solved this issue. I left this meeting with these community members, church pastors, I came back to the station and I sat down with sergeants, lieutenants, majors, different ranks, and we sat down and we talked. And I listened to, sergeants, couple of years, 10 years on the
Mhm.
job, lieutenants, 15 years on the job,
Mhm.
lieutenants, a major, 18 years on the job. And we sat down and we talked, right? And the guy who came up with the solution was the guy with the youngest amount of time, least amount of time, the young sergeant, right? 10 years on the job, 12 years on the job. He came up with the solution, which we're going to implement and which is going to save me, a lot of headaches. My mustache is going to stay black for a little bit. It's not going to turn gray anymore, you know, and it's because it doesn't have to be me. Even though I'm the chief, it doesn't matter. He came up with the solution. And that's not the first time that he's come up
Yeah.
with the solution. He came up with another great idea of us rotating sergeants through our internal affairs division
Mm.
so that they can get a taste of what internal affairs officers do, or sergeants do,
Yeah.
which is now being shared nationally. And that was him. So we're listening to, these younger officers, and I'll take a great idea from anywhere.
Mhm.
But we
Yep.
have to be able to be humble to listen to
Mhm.
our younger officers, and that's the kind of organization that I lead, where people are not afraid to talk and people are not
Yeah.
afraid to share their opinions. And one of the lieutenants in that office said, many years back, he worked for a certain chief, and he said when he shared an opinion under that chief, he was ostracized, and that was the last time he shared an opinion,
Oh, yeah.
you know?
Yep.
So under, under my command, we share opinions, and
Mhm.
I want to hear those opinions because many minds are better than one mind.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you. There's so much insight in that response, Ron. And I think too, I think we forget that oftentimes as a titled leader, our work is accomplished through others. And if we're not giving them the tools and we're not empowering them, we're not listening to their voice, then, we're tying our own hands behind our back. So, yeah, I really love that. Thank you for what you're doing. That's one of the biggest joys of having this podcast is hearing from true leaders like you who are doing these things that are changing the work lives because then that changes home lives, right? And that changes the conversations you're having in the community. So I really thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's continue, and this is, part and parcel with your type of work. And I see that, a lot of organizations, even traditional ones, are moving away from command and control environments to more community focused leadership. And certainly you just shared that really powerful example of engaging and working, lock and step with the community. But I'm wondering, Ron, from your experience or what you're seeing other counterparts going through, what's the hardest part of that transition, especially when it comes to like a leader's inner dialogue, that conversation with themselves and trying to release grip of that command and control and embrace that community focused approach?
So again, ego tells you, hey, I'm comfortable and I don't want to change. Right. So when you have been doing something the same way over and over, you're comfortable there and you don't want to move into this new area. And I always say to my people, let's get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And during my process with them and developing my officers, they understand that. I've been developing them, moving officers into different places so that they can become more well-rounded and more developed. We have the hardcore guy who's been rocking and rolling on
Mm-hmm.
different specialty units. And this particular lieutenant, he is now in my neighborhood resource unit, right? And now he is engaging with the community, and he recently came and thanked me because he is seeing another portion
Yep.
of this job and a very important
Mm-hmm.
portion of this job. If we lose the community, that's it. We failed,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so
Yep.
important. Now, this job is the hardest that it's been in my 30 years. This time period right now, the last 5 to 8 years has been the hardest in
Yep.
policing in my whole career. So he understands that. So another part of this is us integrating empathy into the way
Mm-hmm.
we do our jobs. Super powerful tool that sometimes we don't have enough of in policing.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that to say this, we are used to trauma, right? Things, and talking about physical trauma, psychological trauma,
Mm-hmm.
we're just around it a lot. And most citizens are not, right?
No.
And at times we have to make sure that we put ourselves in their shoes and
Mhm.
kind of, understand that we're desensitized to a lot of stuff. And that event that happened in their neighborhood, while we're used to this huge city that we police,
Mhm.
that's very specific to them. That's very personal to them. And we have to be sensitive to that. And we have to be respectful to that. And we have to make sure that we're, understanding of that and not dismissive, and kind of put our mindset into, what if that was your neighborhood? What if that was your mother?
Mhm.
What if that was your grandmother? What was that if that was your mother on that traffic stop? What was that if it was your mother that was, the victim of a burglary? And
Mhm.
treating these citizens as just numbers, right? And if we can put that empathy into there, deliver
Mhm.
that high quality service, we
Mhm.
will be able to, you know, win that community and really start making some effective changes. So it's getting them to kind of
Mhm.
get out of that, that
Mhm.
mindset of, hey, I want to still stay in this, command and
Mhm.
control, as you would say,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
mindset.
Yeah.
Change it to, this empathetic, compassionate mindset.
Yeah.
Get them uncomfortable, because it is uncomfortable
Yeah.
for most of
Yeah.
them, and
Mhm.
get them thinking a different way. And what I've been
Mhm.
able to do here is kind of, my first year here, I taught classes on
Mhm.
introspection and self-awareness and ego, and got them
Mhm.
comfortable with these subjects so that when we're transitioning to these different things, it wouldn't be foreign to them and they would understand what I'm talking about as we start implementing these things. And when we start talking about, hey, being empathetic,
Mhm. Yeah.
exercises that they would have gone through in those classes where they
Mhm.
what I'm talking about. So it's not new when I say, "Hey, where was the empathy used
Mhm.
in this instant incident?" And they can
Yep.
say, "Well, what are you talking about?" No, they've been through a class,
Yep.
what I'm talking about. They've given
Mhm.
examples. They understand.
Mhm. Yep. You're like, "I know you know, because I
Right.
taught you." Yeah. I was just thinking too, that is such an important takeaway, that getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. I think the hardest lesson, something I'm trying to do with my kids, with my students, that you're thinking, in any role, right? If you're a physician and you recognize that this diagnosis, even though you've already delivered it 2 other times today, is earth-shattering to this patient. Or, when I have students struggling with things, trying to remember how hard it was to be an undergrad, things like that. So I really appreciate what you're doing and what you're modeling there. And as you're saying, how that is changing the relationship with the communities you serve.
And even just the way we talk amongst ourselves, how we deal amongst ourselves, how we're developing ourselves internally. So so it's working internally and also externally as we deal with the community, as we're trying to improve the culture and change the culture here.
Yeah. So, Ren, let's talk about the ego audit now. And, I was hoping you could give us a couple questions a leader can ask themselves before they're walking into a high stakes meeting or situation to ensure they're leading with presence and not pride.
Yeah, so again, empathy, put yourself in their shoes, right? So I see this all the time when we're dealing with issues, and that's happened to me. An example of that, there's many times where I've been into a meeting with some community members and I really haven't seen the problem from where they're coming from, right? I don't understand where they're coming from. It just happened not too long ago. And I really had to step back, use some introspection, use some empathy, put myself in their shoes and look at the problem through their eyes, and really gave me some awareness and some understanding. And I was a bit better able to understand the problem and
Mm-hmm.
better able to kind of address that problem. So huge way to kind of, we don't do that, right? It's them,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
us, hey, this is the way we think. You're thinking it
Mm-hmm.
that way. And we're going to try to meet in the middle for some common ground.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we can't meet in the middle. So I'm a big one for kind of, hey, I'm going to put myself in your shoes and try to
Mm-hmm.
see it. I do it a lot with my younger officers, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I teach my middle management, my sergeants, my lieutenants.
Mm-hmm.
Remember when you were
Mm-hmm.
2 years on the job? Put
Yep.
yourself in that officer's shoes. How were
Mm-hmm.
you acting when you were 2, 3 years on the ground?
Mm-hmm.
How much training did you have when you were 2, 3 years on the ground?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the second part of that, right?
Yep.
See the problem through their eyes and then remember when you were at that level, and
Yep.
that will give you a huge insight into
Mhm.
address this issue. So that's the way I answered that question. And
Yeah.
we use that a lot here. And I
Mhm.
say that a lot. And it's funny when I bring that up, a lot of my people, my lieutenants and captains and majors,
Mhm.
aha, wow, I didn't
Yep.
think of it that way. And
Yep.
it goes with the judgment, right? We're being judgmental.
Mhm.
I wouldn't do that. Well, you're
Mhm.
looking at it through your eyes of
Yep.
being 20 years on the job. Look at it through their
Yep.
eyes with being 3 years on the job. You're looking at it
Mhm.
all your training. Look at it through their training, you know,
Yeah. Yep.
and we've been able to really shift and kind of not be so confrontational and being able to address the stuff with a different type of way and
Mhm.
be better at solving those issues at that level.
Yeah, and that's such a good point because I think so often we judge ourselves on our intentions, but we judge others on their behaviors. Even if they're, well, I didn't mean that, or this is what I was thinking. But it is important to remember when we look back, we didn't know what we didn't know, right? I think about my undergrads. I'm like, you don't even know what questions to ask, right? Because you're brand new. You're just getting started. So that is a helpful reminder because it's not that they don't want to do well. A lot of times they don't have the experience yet or the additional training yet.
I just was dealing with my internal affairs. We were looking at something, and my internal affairs guys and my training guys were like, "Yeah, this is in policy." And I'm like, "Okay, cool, but let's look back a little bit." I see a couple of things. I see this young officer. There's a hero type thing with this young officer here in the particular thing, and they were
Mhm.
like, "Okay, yeah, okay, we see that." And then I said, "Here, there's a little tactical thing here. Can you see
Mhm.
that?" "Yes, I can see that." And it's all about teaching, right?
Yep.
Teaching and with respect and compassion.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then I asked the lieutenant, both of them were lieutenants. I said, I want you to look at this through my eyes. Can you put yourself in my shoes, right? When I have to go to a community meeting, or when I have to go
Yep.
speak to the mayor, or when I have to go speak, to, the department at whole, or the media, when I'm dealing with this. So can you put yourself in my shoes? I'm putting myself in your shoes. Can you
Mhm.
put yourself in my shoes?
Yep.
And then the light bulb went off, right? Which I
Yeah.
love, right? I
Yep.
love when the light
Yep.
bulb goes off. And I also love like the next day when I get the visit
Mhm.
from them and they're like, hey, that what you said resonated with me.
Yeah.
And those are beautiful. I love those
Mhm.
conversations where it
Yep.
hit the next day, they marinated with that and it really
Mhm.
sunk in and we have another further conversation which makes it
Yeah.
stick. And that's what I live for. Those
Mhm.
conversations that
Yep.
that point made it there and it's going to stay in the memory bank forever.
Yeah, because it's like those are nice points of validation. And also, I just keep thinking, I think so much, if you take leadership and you strip it down, it means to influence. And you are doing such beautiful modeling for everyone around you that I have no doubt when they're in similar situations, going to say, hey, let's think about it from their perspective. Can you try and think about it from my perspective? Right. So it's this generative gift that keeps giving.
And let me say this, right? And this is another quote that I have in the book
Mm-hmm.
used in my training.
Mm-hmm.
Look, we win or I win the battle against ego about 85% of the time.
Mhm.
There's 15% of the time that I don't win.
Yep. Yep.
Last week I had an incident where I did not win the
Yep.
battle against ego. I took something personal. We're all human, and that happens. So not an angel, not perfect.
Mhm.
I just have done a lot of work in this and
Mhm.
I hold myself to a very high standard, but I
Mhm.
am not perfect. And this is a continuous journey. And, I recognized that something was perfect, did a lot of introspection, took a walk with the dogs, had the conversation with my
Yep.
wife, and regrouped. And then the next day
Mhm.
was ready to go at it again and
Yep.
understood what I did. So,
Yeah, and that's really powerful too, and reminding people and sharing that with people that, yep, I stumble sometimes too, but here's what I do afterwards,
yeah, 100%.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Ron, we've already talked a little bit about trust, but I want to continue to think about this because we know that it's built or broken kind of in the heat of the moment. And I'm wondering, what is one communication habit that you've observed that can erode trust in these high pressure teams?
When somebody's dismissive, somebody's dismissive, incredibly disrespectful, I think it's super important, like I've just demonstrated, that everybody's heard, their opinions are respected, even if, somebody's opinion, like if it's way out there, just bringing it in, maybe explaining why, it won't work, with respect, right? But when somebody is just totally dismissive, and I have issues with somebody's like an obstructionist, right? Where they're just constantly putting up these barriers, right?
Yep.
And that's the opposite of what I am, right? I'm a guy that's looking, to
Mm-hmm.
go under the barrier, over the barrier, break the
Yeah.
barrier, and I've been successful because of that attitude.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've had talks with some of the leaders who have kind of shut down people when they've brought these
Mm-hmm.
ideas. I want my people to feel like I have an idea, I want to bring it up, and we've encouraged even very young officers to bring forward ideas. I've had people as young as 2, 3 years on the job come before staff to present ideas, and I encourage that, and
Yep.
they feel proud. And, they'll remember that for the rest of their careers.
Mm-hmm.
They'll feel like, wow, I can speak. And some of those ideas we've implemented, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
something as
Yep.
simple as having a car marked up to
Mm-hmm.
for become a veteran's car or a recruitment car,
Mm-hmm.
having
Mm-hmm.
it marked up specially,
Yeah.
specialty, or the beginning of a special unit, but they feel part of the team and they feel empowered and they feel important, right?
Yep.
Which we all want to feel important, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
But being totally dismissive and just totally,
Yeah.
disrespected, I remember that feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope that I never make anybody feel that way when I'm
Yeah.
having those conversations. And there are times when, I'm in some meetings and, with especially with community members, and
Mm-hmm.
there's some strong opinions about policing. And, we're getting beat up a little bit, and sometimes, I interrupt, and
Mm-hmm.
somebody's telling me to don't interrupt them. I catch myself, I apologize, and come
Mm-hmm.
back. I don't wanna be that dismissive person. I want them
Mm-hmm.
to express themselves. So,
Yep.
that's a huge thing, and that if their sergeants are like that, if their lieutenants are like that,
Mm-hmm.
you're just gonna
Mm-hmm.
erode that trust immediately and
Yep.
possibly forever the way you do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you point out that's not easy, right? Sometimes it's easier than others. And it's a practice. It's something that, that muscle gets stronger the more we work on it and taking that time to I think for a lot of folks it's thinking about the nonverbals as well. So it could be listening, but when we're really irritated, right? Or we're thinking this is nonsense, even though we're not going to verbalize it, sometimes our face, our posture is. So it's thinking about those things as well. But yeah, that's an important lesson. And you're right. Once we're dismissed, that's a really hard feeling to come back from if we do at all.
Yeah, and I've had to learn about that, especially my facial expressions. I can't
Mhm.
play poker. You could read
Mhm.
everything on my face, and
Yeah,
that's something that I've
same.
had to work
Yep.
on with my face too,
Mhm.
because I'm very proud of what we're doing here. I'm
Mhm.
proud to be the chief
Mhm.
of this department. I'm proud of
Yep.
the work we're doing, and sometimes you get attacked, and sometimes you deserve it, sometimes you don't,
Yep.
and,
Yep.
but it's super important to let
Mhm.
people say what they need to say and shut up and don't be so dismissive. And I tell you right now that I do that with my people, but
Mhm.
now I'm learning to make sure that I do that, especially with the community,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
don't be dismissive. And I'm learning, put that into my toolbox, and that's
Yep.
something I have to work on
Mhm.
hard. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, Ron, I know that you've advised police forces internationally. And when I was getting ready for our conversation, I was thinking, from your experience, do you notice these universal ego traps that you see across culture? Or are you seeing kind of the expression of ego changing based on context and environment?
yeah, so it's funny. So I spent two different there was 2 different times where I was in Mexico. So first time, 2011, I went down and I trained a SWAT team in
Mm,
Leon, Mexico, one of the best times in my career. The second time I was running a training program for the State Department, and I lived there for a year. That would have been 2014 to 2015. And my touches with the Mexicans were very limited. I was mainly supervising the Americans there. So I'll go back to my
Mhm.
time in Leon, Mexico, where I was
Mhm.
actually training the team.
Mhm.
Great experience, very humble. I learned that many of these officers who were not paid very well had 2 or 3 jobs to not be corrupt, you know,
Mhm.
very humble, and they were like sponges. To this day, I'm Facebook friends
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
quite a few of
Mhm.
them. They call me profe for professor, right? I made some really good connections because even though at that point in time I was in my ego stage
Mhm.
of my career, I was humble with them and I connected with them. I was doing something that I
Mhm.
loved and had a really great time with them. So they were
Yeah.
humble, they were sponges. I was having
Mhm.
a great time doing that training. However,
Mhm.
right, one of their chiefs of the department, this guy was an egomaniac, and
Mhm.
he wanted to mark his territory, and which is a typical, you know, this guy came out of central casting for what you would think
Okay.
a Mexican police chief slash
Mhm.
kind of maybe somebody that was kind of corrupt would look like,
Mhm.
and made us feel uncomfortable, made us
Mm.
feel he was dismissive, and where everybody else in that whole place made us feel so welcomed. And I have great
Mhm.
stories about my time there. And I was there a
Mhm.
couple different times training the team. This guy was just so totally dismissive. It was just
Mhm.
put a bad taste in our mouth and we only met
Yep.
him at time, and it was just for maybe like an hour. And that was the day they graduated. So it didn't do
Yeah.
enough to ruin, but it was just
Mhm.
like, hey, this exists everywhere. And
Yep.
I'll tell you a story. We trained the team for 2 weeks, and then we
Mhm.
left, and then we had to come back. And
Mhm.
during the time that we left, another American company came down to do some training, and this guy trained their team, and they had a shoot house, right? And they were very
Mhm.
proud of this shoot house that they had.
Mhm.
And this guy came down and like typical, what you would say, typical American tactical guy,
Mhm.
yelling at them, which we never did, right?
Yep.
Total egomaniac, kicked down the door,
Mhm.
their SWAT, their shoot house, made them feel like crap,
Mhm.
and just really. And then after he was done, I posted, like when I was finished, I wrote an article about my time
Mhm.
there and posted it. And then he commented on that, and he
Mhm.
made a kind of a negative comment on that, so he still couldn't, let it go.
Let it go.
Right, and, but so here there's ego all over the place, but,
Yep.
yeah, so the Mexicans there were
Mhm.
very good, very, very humble, but yet
Mhm.
here's their commander who displayed the typical trappings of ego.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this next question, Ron, kind of piggybacks on that. So I'm wondering how, in your experience in your consulting, how do you coach a leader to apologize or admit a mistake in a way that actually increases their professional stature, their credibility, rather than diminishing it? Because I think that's the big fear, right? If I have to own this mistake, I'm less credible or I'm going to be seen as less of a leader. But what do you suggest there?
I'm constantly telling stories and telling my officers about my mistakes, right? That's what good
Mhm.
mentors do,
Mhm.
right? We show our officers the landmines, right, where they exploded so that they don't follow in
Mhm.
that path, so they can go around that and they don't have to, step on those landmines. So many of the stories that I share with my mentees or just the officers in general have to do with my mistakes and where things blew up in my face. And basically I'm saying, don't don't do
Mhm.
what I did. Stay away from that. And I don't think apologizing when it's from the heart is ever wrong, but it has to be from the
Mhm.
heart. So, and you have
Yeah.
to mean it and you have to take that accountability. It
Mhm.
is disappointing, right? And this is why I'm always harping on you better mean it. I can't force
Mhm.
anybody to apologize. I will never force anybody to
Mhm.
apologize. That does not work. I am disappointed when I have this conversation in my office with somebody and they admit they're wrong and
Mhm.
they admit well, they
Mhm.
take accountability for their actions.
Yep.
And then they leave my office, and then I
Mm.
hear that, they didn't do anything wrong. right? They got the shaft,
Mhm.
they're the victim.
Yep.
And, that shows me their character, and it shows me
Mhm.
they just don't understand leadership and that they have a lot more work to do, right?
Mhm.
And so again, with me, I'm
Mhm.
always apologizing.
Mhm.
And there's been
Mhm.
times where I've shown them in public where I've
Yep.
apologized for actions on behalf of officers, for stuff that's kind of gone viral in town hall meetings to the media where I've said we were wrong, you know,
Mhm.
and show them that. And they've seen me at town hall meetings, in front of a group of 100, 200
Mm.
citizens,
Yeah.
answer questions for an hour and a half on a
Mhm.
quote unquote hostile crowd, and just have my integrity questioned, but handle
Mhm.
that with grace and just, take it,
Mhm.
accept accountability,
Yep.
and, just move forward and do it the
Mhm.
right way. So I try to do that by example, and also
Mhm.
just kind of say, hey, this is what I've done. This is what worked for me. I've had a pretty good career. This is probably a best practice. Saying you're sorry, admitting their
Mhm.
mistakes is not a bad thing.
Yep.
Look at what I've done, not a bad
Mhm.
thing, but mean it. Don't say you're sorry and then leave my
Mhm.
office and say, hey, I did not mean that, because it means nothing,
Yeah.
if you
Yep.
do that. And that's been, I've seen that multiple times in my
Mhm.
career, and it's sad,
Mhm.
right? It's sad
Yep.
when you invest in somebody, you invest time,
Mhm.
money, a lot of training,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
then they just don't get it. And, that's part of it where you're not going to help everybody. Not everybody's going to drink
Mhm. Yep.
the Kool-Aid, right?
Yep.
And that's life, So, but you can just keep on trying and keep on pushing your methods and keep on helping as many people as you can help.
Yeah, and I love that when you were walking us through your response, I was thinking about earlier when you were talking about, looking at yourself in the mirror, right? And so if you identify as a leader and you strive to be a leader and accountable, and, we all make those mistakes, but then walking out of the office and being like, "You're done with that, but that's not, I wasn't wrong," right? You've got to look yourself in the mirror and know that you chose to say one thing here to the leader and another behind the leader's back, and what is that saying about your leadership, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or lack thereof.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, over these last couple of years, I've used the word delusional a lot,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And I use
Mhm.
it, and it's sad where I'm like, don't be that person, you know,
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
honest with yourself, be brutally honest with yourself, and have those ego audits with yourself, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Because you don't want to be that person who thinks, you're everything and everybody else sees somebody totally different.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Gosh. Well, Ron, I have two final questions for you, and these go hand in hand. And this is the way we end all episodes of The Communicative Leader. So the first part is, what is the pragmatic tip or challenge or advice you want to leave our titled leaders with? And then the second part is, what do you want to leave our employees of across all ranks in terms of that tip, challenge, or advice?
Sure. So work on your self awareness and empathy. I think it's super important. We don't do that enough, right? Super important tools that we just don't do enough, right? That self awareness and that empathy, right? And I think I've kind of beaten those horses to death throughout the podcast today, right? And the interview. Super important tools, very easy to do. And in the book, I talk about them extensively and give examples on how to achieve them and why they're so important. And I think I've given multiple examples of why they're so important. Just the last one with delusion, right? You want to make sure when you're looking at the mirror, who you see every morning is the same person that everybody else sees, every day. You don't want to
Mhm.
see a knight, or a queen, right? And then
Yeah.
everybody else sees, a court jester, you know.
Yeah. Yep.
That's
Yep.
and again, unfortunately, this year I've seen a lot of delusion, and
Mm.
last year I've seen a lot of delusion, and that's unfortunate, right? A lot of mental health stuff
Mhm.
having to do with that, or denial, where some people need some therapy, right? And so open with my journey with therapy,
Mhm.
right? Because I was that, but
Mhm.
back in 2013, before therapy, who I was looking in the mirror was not what everybody else was looking in the mirror,
Yep.
and therapy changed my life, and I pushed that to everybody, you know. And the last thing I would say is, I've been a boss, a lieutenant or above for 17
Mhm.
years, right? And a chief for 10. The last 10 years I've been a chief. Most of the problems that I encounter have some element of ego to it. And that's what motivated me to start, doing
Mhm.
research and start talking
Yep.
about this and start, you know, giving classes on this, and then eventually start writing a book about this because
Mhm.
nobody was talking about this. Yes, there are some people, some famous people that mention this and they talk about this, you know, but
Mhm.
extensively going into this and giving you tools on how to address this, I didn't see anything like that. So that's why I started writing the book and giving people tools on how to address this, how to work on this. So think about it, right? For the leaders that are in here, think about the problems
Mhm.
that personnel problems you have or the conflicts you have
Mhm.
within your life. Think about your sports teams or think about your family life, but mainly think about your career and the conflicts you have.
Mhm.
If you're a boss and you're managing people
Mhm.
or your interpersonal, conflicts that you're having with your peers or, company to company, and it all has to do with ego, or I'd say 90% of it has to do with ego. So
Yep.
wouldn't it be good to start working on your ego, right? In order to
Mhm.
kind of get a heads up on that. And then eventually, if your ego is good, then you can start working on others' egos. So
Yeah.
now it's funny in my organization,
Mhm.
people come in and we have, if there's somebody has an issue, they can come in and say, Chief, that was my ego getting in the way. That's music to my ears,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And then we've gotten past that problem, right? Gotten
Yep.
past that hurdle. And now we can start work
Mhm.
tools to kind of work on that and then move.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's the main thing that I'm saying here is, hey,
Mhm.
that is a big issue that we just don't talk about, right? We talk about discipline or you've broken these rules,
Mhm.
and we're not looking at the ego portion. And I personally believe from what I see daily,
Yeah.
right? If we can get on top of that ego, we can take care of everything else.
Yeah. Ron, thank you so much. This has been so insightful. You've left with so many pragmatic tips and tools. I know things that I'm going to revisit and be thinking about, and I know that are really going to be meaningful for our listeners.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's an honor. Appreciate it.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on The Communicative Leader.